When people imagine a shelter, they often picture chaos. The one my daughter and I lived in was quieter than that. The building had once been a small community center. The rooms were simple: 2 beds, a dresser, a narrow window looking over a parking lot where the lights stayed on all night. Every evening around 6, the smell of whatever dinner volunteers had prepared moved through the hallway. My daughter, Emma, was 6. She treated the place like an extended sleepover. Children have a strange ability to adjust when adults around them try not to show fear. She made friends. She colored at the long folding tables in the common room. Sometimes she asked when we were getting our own place again. I usually answered with something vague: soon. The truth was more complicated. 3 years earlier, when my grandfather died, there had been conversations about family property. I remembered the words inheritance and probate and Cedar Ridge Drive, but I had never paid close attention. My parents handled the paperwork. They told me everything was being sorted out and that the house had already been sold to settle certain expenses. At the time I believed them. Life had already begun falling apart in other ways: job loss, a medical bill that turned into debt. Then the slow slide into the shelter system. You stop questioning old paperwork when you're focused on getting through the week. My grandmother didn't know about any of it. I had avoided telling her where we were living. Every time she called, I kept the conversations short and careful. But one afternoon she arrived anyway. I was helping Emma with a puzzle in the shelter's common room. When I saw her standing in the doorway, she looked exactly as she always had: gray coat, small purse, posture straight enough to make strangers assume she had once been a teacher. For a moment she simply looked around the room. At the children coloring. At the metal chairs. At the quiet line of people waiting near the kitchen. Then she looked at me. "Why are you here?" she asked gently. I didn't answer right away. There are certain moments where the truth feels heavier than silence. Emma ran over and hugged her legs. "Grandma." My grandmother smiled and crouched down to hug her back. Then she stood again and looked at me carefully. We sat down at the folding table. I explained what had happened over the past year. The job loss. The apartment we couldn't keep. The waiting lists for housing assistance. She listened without interrupting. After a while she asked something that felt completely unrelated. "Why aren't you living in your house on Cedar Ridge Drive?" The words stopped me. "Me what?" She blinked. "House your grandfather left you." I stared at her. "What house?" The silence between us changed shape. My grandmother leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on the table. "I remember the paperwork," she said quietly. "Your grandfather signed it 6 months before he died." I shook my head. "Mom and Dad said it was sold." She didn't react immediately. She just sat there for a long moment, looking past me at the wall. Then she said softly, almost to herself, "That's strange." 2 days later she called me again. "Come to your cousin's birthday dinner on Saturday," she said. "I don't think I'd like you there," she said. Her tone wasn't forceful. But it wasn't a suggestion either. The party took place at my parents' house. The same one where I had grown up. Emma stayed close to me the whole time, overwhelmed by the noise and unfamiliar relatives. My parents acted surprised to see me, though they hid it behind polite smiles. My grandmother arrived about 20 minutes later. She greeted everyone calmly, took her seat at the dining table, and waited until the room had settled into casual conversation. Then she set a thin folder on the table. "Before we start dessert," she said, "I have a question." The room quieted slightly. My father leaned back in his chair. She opened the folder. Inside were several documents. "I was reviewing some older records this week," she said. "Property records, specifically." My mother shifted in her seat. My grandmother looked at them both. "Why isn't your daughter living in the house on Cedar Ridge Drive?" The room went still. My father laughed lightly. "That property was sold years ago." My grandmother nodded. "Yes. That's what I heard." Then she reached into her purse and placed her phone on the table. "Let's call the lawyer and confirm." No one stopped her. She dialed. The call went to speaker. After a brief greeting she explained the situation calmly. The lawyer on the other end sounded confused. Sold, he said. No, that property was transferred. My grandmother looked at my parents. Transferred to whom? The lawyer paused while checking something. Then he answered. To your son and daughter-in-law. During the probate process, the air in the room seemed to thin. My grandmother closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, she spoke very quietly. Call the lawyer, she said, looking directly at my parents. We're fixing this tonight. My mother's face had gone pale. My father looked like someone trying to remember exactly when the ground beneath him had started shifting. Around the table, relatives sat in complete silence. For the first time in years, I realized something important. The story I had been told about my life, about why things had turned out the way they had, wasn't the whole story, and someone, finally, had decided it was time for the truth to exist in the open.